the girl who watched the river before anyone called her a queen. Cleopatra was a girl who stood still too often. Not because she was shy, because she was listening. From the palace balcony, she watched the Nile move beneath the morning light, carrying boats, reeds, fishermen, and the slow breath of Egypt itself. The river did not hurry. It did not explain itself. It simply moved forward, carrying the country with it. Cleopatra liked that. She liked the way the river reminded her that power did not always shout. Sometimes it flowed quietly, until everything depended on it. The servants thought she was only looking at water. She was not. She was learning the first lesson of her life. Everything important moves beneath the surface. The morning she asked the wrong question, her tutors expected silence. Cleopatra gave them questions. Why do kings fear writers? Why do men call themselves rulers when they are afraid of women speaking? Why does a crown matter more than the mind inside it? The room always changed after she asked. Men shifted in their chairs. Teachers lowered their eyes. Someone usually cleared their throat and changed the subject. But Cleopatra had already seen enough. She saw that the people who controlled the story often feared the person who could question it. Even as a child, she knew this was a dangerous gift. She had it anyway. The roses in the palace garden, the garden behind the palace, was famous for its roses. Deep red petals, thick green stems, a scent that seemed almost too rich for daylight. Cleopatra used to walk there before sunrise, when the flowers were still closed, and the dew clung to everything like a secret. One morning, she reached to touch a bloom and pricked her finger. A tiny drop of blood appeared. She stared at it for a long moment. Beauty, she thought, should not be trusted too quickly. That thought would stay with her for years. Because in her world, love, loyalty, ambition, and betrayal often wore the same face at first glance. The table where people lied politely, when Cleopatra became old enough to sit at political meals. She learned that the most dangerous room in any kingdom was not the throne room. It was the dining room. People laughed there while hiding their motives. They praised each other while counting weaknesses. They passed dishes and wine and compliments as if all of it were harmless, while every sentence carried another meaning under the surface. Cleopatra watched carefully. A man's hand tightened on a cup when he felt threatened. A woman's smile lasted 1 second too long when she wanted something. A servant who stood too close to the wall had probably heard something useful. She learned to read the small things. That became her greatest survival skill. The lesson her father never said aloud. Her father was not a tender man, but he was not foolish either. One evening, she found him alone, staring at a pile of papers he had no energy left to finish. His face looked older than she remembered. He did not speak for a while. Then he said, almost to himself, "Power is expensive." Cleopatra remembered that sentence more clearly than any lesson written on a scroll. Not because it sounded wise, because it sounded tired. She understood then that the throne was not a prize. It was a burden that could break the person carrying it. And still, people fought for it. The brother who was supposed to be her ally when her brother stood near the throne. The court called it balance. Cleopatra called it theater. He was young. He was surrounded by advisors. He smiled when told to smile, and frowned when told to frown. The men around him acted as if they were guarding the future of Egypt, but Cleopatra could see their fear. They did not fear him, they feared her. That was the real story. She noticed it in the way they spoke a little too quickly when she entered. In the way some people avoided meeting her eyes. In the way a room could become quiet without anyone giving the command. They wanted a ruler. They could move like a piece on a board. Cleopatra was not that piece. That was the problem. The day she left the palace without crying, people imagine exile as dramatic. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it arrives with folded instructions, controlled faces, and a tone that pretends to be polite. Cleopatra packed only what mattered, not everything she loved. Only what she could carry into the future. That was a form of wisdom. You cannot leave with every possession. You leave with memory, with strategy, with whatever still belongs to you when the walls have been taken away. She did not cry when she left, not because she was cold, because she was already learning how to return. The first night away from power outside the palace, the world did not bow. That was strange at first. People walked past with their own worries. Merchants shouted prices. Children ran through dust. A woman carried bread. A man argued with his neighbor over a mule. Life continued. The kingdom was not only the palace. Cleopatra understood this all at once. That night, she sat in a smaller room than she had ever known, and the silence felt different from palace silence. It was not empty, it was hers. For the first time in a long while, no one was watching her every movement. She found that terrifying and freeing. The rumor named Caesar the Roman arrived in her life long before she saw his face. His name traveled ahead of him like a storm, Julius Caesar. People said it in different tones, depending on what they feared most. Soldier, conqueror, strategist, unpredictable, dangerous, brilliant. Cleopatra listened to the rumor the way some people listen to music. Not for the melody, for the pattern. A man that powerful could destroy a kingdom. Or he could change its fate. She did not think of romance first. She thought of possibility. That was very Cleopatra. The entrance nobody forgot people loved telling this story because it sounds like legend. She arrived wrapped, carried, revealed at the right moment. But what matters is not the trick. What matters is the courage underneath it. She entered Caesar's world not as a beggar asking to be saved, but as a queen forcing herself to be seen. That is a different kind of power. When he looked at her, Cleopatra did not flinch. She understood something in that room changed at once. Not because she was the prettiest woman there, but because she was the only one not trying to become smaller than the men around her. That matters. It always matters. The conversations that became a bridge at first, they spoke like rulers. Carefully, measured, every word placed with attention, then something shifted. He asked questions that were not meant to trap her. She answered in ways that were honest enough to matter. Their conversations became longer, then deeper, then strangely personal in ways neither of them named. She discovered that he respected intelligence. He discovered that she could think 3 steps ahead while still sounding calm. What began as alliance slowly became recognition. And recognition can be more dangerous than attraction. Because attraction fades, recognition stays. The evening he listened one evening, the palace was quieter than usual. The lamps were low. The air smelled faintly of incense and warm stone. Cleopatra was speaking about Egypt, about grain, trade, and the people beyond the palace walls. Caesar could have dismissed her as decorative. Many men would have. Instead, he listened, really listened, not like a man waiting for his turn to speak. Like a man who realized he was hearing something valuable. That was the moment she softened, only slightly, in a place she had always kept guarded. It is easy to fall for a grand gesture. It is harder to forget the person who made you feel intelligent in a world that kept trying to make you ornamental. The return that felt like a rebirth when her power was restored. It did not feel triumphant in the way songs describe victory. It felt like breathing again after being underwater too long. The city looked familiar and strange at once. The halls remembered her. The people remembered her, but she no longer felt like the same person who had left. Exile had sharpened her. Caesar had changed the shape of her future. And she had learned, in the middle of loss, that she could survive being removed from the center of the world. That knowledge made her stronger than the crown. The child she protected, quietly motherhood, changed Cleopatra in a way the court did not fully understand. She did not suddenly become soft. She became focused. A child is a kind of promise, but also a kind of vulnerability. She watched him sleep and thought about the future with a seriousness that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with survival. She had once fought for her own place. Now she fought for a future that would outlive her. That kind of love is not loud. It is vigilant. The news that arrived like a broken vase when Caesar was killed. The palace did not collapse. That is the strange thing about history. The world can change violently, while the room where you stand remains almost perfectly still. Cleopatra heard the news, and for a moment the world inside her went quiet. Not theatrical silence, the kind that happens when the mind is too full to speak. Caesar was gone, and with him went a chapter of her life that had held both strategy and feeling. She did not have time to grieve properly. Queens rarely do, but the loss stayed. It changed the way she moved through every room afterward. The man who felt too alive to be safe, Mark Antony, entered her story with the force of heat. Where Caesar had been contained, Antony was immediate. He laughed more freely, spoke more boldly, looked like a man who burned too brightly to last without leaving a mark. Cleopatra understood him faster than most people could. She knew men like him could be thrilling and dangerous in the same breath. That made him interesting. It also made him risky, so she met him as she always met powerful men. With grace, with caution. With enough warmth to draw him closer, and enough distance to keep him from thinking he had already won. The banquet that became a memory, people still retell her meetings with Antony like scenes from a play. The gold, the water, the perfume, the spectacle. But beneath the image was something much more human. Two people testing the edge between performance and sincerity. Antony was used to force. Cleopatra was used to being underestimated. That made them unpredictable together. There were moments when he looked at her like she was not just a queen, but a language he wanted to learn. There were moments when she realized he was not pretending with her. That made everything more dangerous, because sincerity is harder to control than strategy. The small habits of falling in love does not always arrive in thunder. Sometimes it arrives in habits. The way someone waits before speaking because they want to get the words right. The way they remember a preference without being told twice. The way they stop, joking for a second, when the other person walks into the room. Cleopatra noticed Antony's attention in small forms. He noticed the same in her. They argued, but they returned. They laughed, then fell quiet. They learned the shape of each other's moods. And in all those ordinary gestures, something extraordinary grew. The day the sea turned strange, the Battle of Actium is often spoken of, as if it were only a military event. But battles are also emotional weather. The sea was moving. Commands were shouted. Men were tense. The air itself seemed to know that history was narrowing toward a decision. Cleopatra was not blind to the stakes. She knew when things were slipping. She knew when a choice had to be made before certainty was possible. So she acted in the way she believed would preserve what could still be preserved. People later debated that choice. People always do. But in that moment, she was not a myth. She was a woman making a decision under pressure. That is the truth of it. The silence after defeat, after the battle, the palace felt different. Not destroyed. Just emptied in spirit. Antony changed after the loss, not all at once, in small ways. He became quieter in places where he had once spoken too quickly. His certainty thinned. His shoulders carried more weight. Cleopatra saw it and understood that defeat can enter a person before anyone says the word aloud. Their conversations became more fragile, not less meaningful. Just more aware that time was no longer generous. The message that destroyed the last hope, the worst losses, often come from misunderstanding. Antony was told Cleopatra was dead. Cleopatra believed him unreachable. That cruelty of misinformation can alter entire lives. Antony made his final choice in grief. When Cleopatra found him, the room held the kind of stillness no one wants to recognize. There are moments when all the power in the world cannot change the fact that you arrived too late. She stayed with him through the end, not because she could save him. Because love, at its most helpless, still chooses presence. That is one of the most human things she ever did. The queen who refused to become a symbol then came Augustus. He was patient. That made him dangerous in a different way. He did not need to rush. He could wait until the world tilted into his favor. He understood how to turn victory into spectacle and spectacle into warning. Cleopatra understood exactly what awaited her if she surrendered in the wrong way. Not peace, a public ending, a lesson for others, a woman displayed as a conquered thing. She had been too intelligent for too long to accept that fate without resistance. So she did what she had always done when the world tried to shrink her. She chose her own meaning. The final room, the last palace room, was quiet. Not luxurious quiet, final quiet. The kind of quiet that presses gently on the walls and tells you the story is near its close. Cleopatra walked through it slowly. She looked at what remained, the stone, the curtains, the light falling through the high windows, the places where her life had once been ordinary in hidden ways. She remembered being a girl there, a queen there, a mother there, a woman in love there, a strategist there. All those selves existed in the same place. And now the room was waiting for her to decide what her ending would mean. The ending that belonged to her history has argued over the details for centuries. That is not surprising. People are often more comfortable discussing how a woman died than how she lived. But Cleopatra's life is richer than the death stories told about her. She was a girl who watched the Nile, a student who loved knowledge, a ruler who understood timing, a woman who survived exile, a queen who spoke to Caesar as an equal, a lover who risked herself with Antony, a mother who carried the future in her arms, a mind too sharp to be reduced, a presence too strong to vanish. That is the true collection of her life. Not one legend, many moments, many selves, many small scenes that together became unforgettable.